Hi, everyone. Today we're going to share a story that starts with something as simple as a dinner reservation, but ends with a reckoning. A quiet woman walks into an upscale restaurant in Los Angeles and triggers a chain reaction that leaves everyone questioning their values. Not because she shouted, not because she caused a scene, but because she refused to bow her head. And the way she was treated will make your blood boil. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it where you are? Danielle Rivers stepped through the grand double doors of Le Palais Étoilé just after 6 p.m. on a Friday evening. The sun was still hanging low behind the skyline of downtown Los Angeles, casting golden streaks through the glass facade of the city's most acclaimed French restaurant. Her outfit was modest, clean navy slacks, a soft blouse the color of indigo dusk, and a plain satchel slung over one shoulder. No jewelry, no designer heels, no entourage. Just a woman seeking one quiet meal to close out a long week. Inside the dining room glittered. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished cutlery and white linen tables. The clientele that evening was the usual crowd, wealthy patrons dressed in tailored suits, in silk dresses, their conversations smooth and effortless, like jazz on a Sunday. But that gentle rhythm of privilege and comfort skipped a beat when Danielle walked in. The host stand sat like a stage at the center of the room where Claire Hastings, tall, slim, and sharp as a blade in her silver-gray uniform, stood with perfect posture and a smile so practiced it barely passed for genuine. Claire had worked at Le Palais for almost a decade. She knew everyone, and more importantly, she knew who belonged. Her eyes landed on Danielle like a scan. The blouse, the shoes, the unadorned face. There wasn't a single brand label visible. No flashes of Cartier or Chanel. No whiff of expensive perfume. Just normal. Clean, confident, and black. Claire's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Good evening," she said with clipped politeness. "Do you have a reservation?" Danielle offered a soft nod. "Yes, under Rivers, one guest." Claire blinked, then slowly typed the name into her system. A small silence bloomed, not long enough to be awkward, just long enough to signal doubt. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard as if she were doing Danielle a favor by checking. Danielle waited, her posture easy, her gaze steady. She'd felt this chill before. "I don't see your name on the list," Claire said, her tone teetering on the edge of professional and passive-aggressive. "Are you sure it's Le Palais Étoilé you meant to book?" Danielle nodded again. "Yes, I called 2 days ago." Another pause. Claire exhaled softly and straightened her back. "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "we've been very full lately. This is our pre-theater rush." Her eyes darted briefly to Danielle's shoes before returning to her face. "But I suppose we can find you something near the kitchen." It wasn't phrased as a punishment, but the message was clear. You don't fit here, and you're lucky I'm even letting you stay. Danielle followed her heels, clicking against the marble floor. The other patrons didn't stare outright, but their glances slid across Danielle's silhouette like cold drafts, curious, calculating, some even amused. At a nearby table, two women paused mid-conversation to look Danielle up and down before returning to their wine. Claire didn't lead her down the grand central aisle where violin music played gently over the hum of conversation. Instead, she veered off toward the far wall into a smaller corridor where the chandeliers didn't quite reach and the soft clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen could be faintly heard. There, a two-top table sat half in shadow next to a swinging door with a patch of scuffed tile underneath it. "Here we are," Claire said, setting down a single menu with a snap. "Let me know if you need anything. Miss Rivers." Danielle pulled out the chair and sat down quietly. She opened the menu without reacting to the tone, the placement, or the looks. She wasn't surprised. Not anymore. The waiter didn't return for almost 15 minutes. The room around her buzzed with celebration, anniversary toasts, business wins, flirtatious laughter. Dishes arrived in clouds of steam and garnishes, bottles of wine uncorked with smooth flourishes. But Danielle sat alone. Her corner remained dark. Finally, Claire reappeared. "Have you decided, or do you need help understanding the menu?" she asked, her voice like polished glass. Danielle looked up. "What's the signature dish here?" Claire's smile twitched. "That would be the canard à l'orange. That's duck, in case you're not familiar." She tilted her head, adding sweetly, "It's $115, just so you know ahead of time." Danielle nodded calmly. "That sounds fine. And a glass of red, please." "Your recommendation." Claire raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She scribbled on her notepad and turned. Behind Danielle, a pair of 20-somethings in pastel blazers were filming her with their phones half hidden under napkins. One whispered, "She actually ordered the duck. I didn't think she'd go through with it." Danielle heard it. She let it pass. Because tonight wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about refusing to shrink. The duck would arrive eventually, and so would the reckoning. Danielle didn't look at her phone. She didn't fidget. She didn't scan the room for support or stare down the people filming her. She just folded her hands neatly in her lap and waited. The kind of stillness that unnerves people used to their targets flinching. It was the stillness of someone who had survived enough rooms like this to know exactly what she was up against. When the appetizer finally arrived, a delicate arrangement of beet carpaccio with microgreens and a dollop of goat cheese mousse, it came without a word. Claire set the plate down a little too hard, causing the vinaigrette to splash against the rim, then dropped the silverware with a clink. Not a greeting, not a smile. Danielle glanced at the plate and then at Claire. "Thank you." Claire didn't respond. She had already turned on her heel and walked away. A few nearby diners had taken notice. One couple across the aisle, an older white gentleman with a younger woman dressed in black satin, watched the exchange. The woman leaned over and murmured something, her expression unreadable. The man simply adjusted his cufflinks and looked away uninterested. Danielle picked up her fork, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. The dish was lovely, she had to admit. Thinly sliced, tender, balanced. But it was hard to enjoy anything when each bite came under the heat of surveillance. Side glances, whispers, the soft click of a phone camera, as if she were an exotic creature somehow seated among their kind. Claire returned again just as Danielle finished the last bite. "Our wine specialist is recommending a 2015 Côte Rôtie to pair with the duck," she said, pretending cordiality. "But that's 60 per glass. I wanted to be sure that's within your budget." Danielle didn't flinch. "That's fine." Claire scribbled again, her lips tight. Of course, there was a tremor under all that grace. Claire wasn't used to this. Not just defiance, but silent defiance. No anger, no aggression. No scene she could weaponize to justify her contempt. Just a woman calmly refusing to lower her eyes. The wine came 10 minutes later, longer than it should have taken. It was accompanied by the entree, the famous duck plated like art and garnished with citrus glaze. But the real art was in what followed. Claire leaned in slightly as she placed the dish on the table. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper, but loud enough for adjacent tables to catch it. "It's customary for our guests to understand the preparation before ordering. This isn't the kind of dish people from certain areas might be used to." She didn't say your people. She didn't say your background. She didn't have to. Danielle froze mid-reach. She looked up slowly. Claire's eyes were steady, challenging. Danielle set her fork down and folded her napkin with precision. "Claire," she said softly, "do you treat all your guests this way or just the ones who don't look like you?" Claire's smile faltered for the first time. From 2 tables away, a young brunette gasped audibly, her phone already recording discreetly tilted upward. A few heads turned. Claire straightened. "I'm just trying to ensure everyone has the best experience." Danielle said nothing. The silence between them buzzed like a wire. Across the room, a woman in a lavender dress whispered, "Did she just say what I think she said?" Her friend nodded wide-eyed. More phones were coming out now. What had been quiet curiosity was shifting into outrage and discomfort. Claire caught it too. She turned briskly and walked away, but not before muttering, "We have standards here, that's all I'm saying." That did it. The room stiffened. One man seated near the entrance stood up halfway in his chair, then sat back down as if unsure whether to intervene. A ripple moved through the space like a breeze before a storm. Eyes darted between Claire and Danielle. Whispered conversations picked up. Chairs creaked. Silverware paused mid-motion, and then someone acted. The young brunette, the one recording since the beginning, stood up and raised her voice. "This is racist. This whole thing, I've been filming it since she walked in." Gasps rang out. Claire froze mid-step. The brunette pointed. "She's been insulted, seated like she's second class and talked down to. Just because she's black. That's what this is." Others chimed in. I saw it too. This is disgusting. Call the manager. A man in his 60s stood up and walked toward the host stand. Where's the manager now? Claire looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her spine, rigid hands clenched at her sides. She tried to gather her composure, but the tide had turned. The room was no longer with her. Even those who had remained silent now looked disturbed, unsettled by what had unfolded. Danielle hadn't moved. She sat still, her expression unreadable, her breath steady. But something in the air had changed. The temperature of the room, the weight of the silence. It was no longer Danielle under the microscope, it was Claire. And the contrast between her faux elegance and Danielle's unshakable grace had never looked sharper. Someone from the back staff area ducked into the hallway and reemerged a moment later. And then came the sound of dress shoes crossing the floor with purpose. A tall man in his late 50s wearing a crisp navy suit and an expression carved from stone appeared beside the host stand. Samuel Linwood, general manager of Le Palais Étoilé, stepped into the center of the dining room like a judge entering a courtroom. He looked at Danielle, he looked at Claire, and he said just 5 words that changed everything, Ms. Rivers. I'm so sorry. The words hung in the air like a sudden hush after thunder. Ms. Rivers, I'm so sorry. It was as if the entire dining room took a breath at once. All the conversations, all the murmurs, all the forks suspended midair froze in that moment. Every eye turned to Danielle, still seated near the kitchen, her posture dignified and composed, her hands resting lightly on the tablecloth. Samuel Linwood stepped forward, his tone calm but firm, the voice of someone who had commanded respect long before tonight. I'm Samuel Linwood, general manager here at Le Palais Étoilé, he said, turning slightly so that both Danielle and the audience of stunned patrons could hear. I want to personally apologize for the unacceptable treatment you have received. Claire Hastings stood to the side, her arms rigid at her sides, her cheeks drained of color. Her voice, which had held such power minutes ago, had vanished behind a brittle silence. Her eyes darted around, searching for some anchor in the room, but no one came to her defense. Samuel turned toward her now. His voice remained even, but there was no mistaking the edge behind it. Claire, please step away from this table. I'll be handling this guest myself, and we'll discuss your behavior in my office after your shift. There was no debate, no room for interpretation. Claire blinked as if waking from a dream. Her lips parted, maybe to argue or explain, but then her shoulders slumped ever so slightly. She gave a single nod and retreated, her heels clicking awkwardly across the floor as she disappeared into the hallway. The silence remained unbroken for another beat. Then came a wave of whispers, phones still held aloft, still recording. But now those cameras were no longer pointed at Danielle like a curiosity. They were focused on Samuel, on the fallout, on the public accountability taking shape in real time. Samuel approached Danielle's table and without hesitation pulled out the opposite chair. May I, he asked? Danielle gestured lightly. Of course. He sat down, folding his hands together. Ms. Rivers, you were seated in the worst corner of this establishment, treated with arrogance, suspicion, and disrespect. None of that reflects the values this restaurant claims to hold. I can only apologize and hope you'll allow me to serve you properly. Danielle held his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said quietly but clearly, it's not the first time, but it never stops being disappointing. Samuel's jaw tightened. I understand. And you're right, it shouldn't be a pattern. Not here, not anywhere. Across the room, the patrons who had filmed and whispered now watched with a different energy. Some looked ashamed. Others, especially those who had remained silent, appeared reflective, uncomfortable with the roles they'd played in the quiet background of someone else's humiliation. Samuel stood, signaling to a nearby waiter with a subtle nod. Ms. Rivers, your meal tonight is on the house, and I will personally ensure everything that follows is handled with the dignity you deserve. Danielle gave a small nod of appreciation. Thank you. And with that, the atmosphere in Le Palais Étoilé began to shift. It wasn't just the managerial apology or the dismissal of the server, it was something deeper. The energy in the room, once cold and complicit, started to thrum with a kind of moral reckoning. A young man in a gray blazer put his phone down and muttered to his date, "We should have said something sooner." The woman nodded, eyes downcast. At a table near the window, a silver-haired woman leaned over to her husband. "I'm ashamed," she whispered. "I was watching it happen and didn't say a word." Her husband sighed. "We've done that too many times in our lives." Nearby, the brunette who had recorded the initial confrontation was now live streaming. This is what accountability looks like, she said softly to the camera. A black woman walked into this restaurant and got treated like she didn't belong, but she didn't yell. She didn't leave. She made them face it. And now the manager is doing what more people in charge should be doing, owning it. The feed picked up Samuel returning to Danielle's table moments later with a sommelier in tow. They discussed wine pairings with quiet professionalism. A freshly prepared duck entree replaced the original. The silverware gleamed under better lighting, and for the first time that evening, Danielle was not just seen, she was treated with the respect she had carried into that room from the very beginning. And Claire, she hadn't left the building. Instead, she sat in the staff hallway behind a frosted glass partition listening. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her lap. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one in control of the room. Her power, built on microaggressions and the unspoken rules of elitism, had cracked wide open in full view of strangers. And what stared back at her wasn't just embarrassment, it was something far more profound. Shame. She thought of all the times she had judged someone based on their shoes, their accent, their clothing. All the people she had subtly steered toward the exit with a forced smile and polite condescension. It had felt so normal, so easy, and now under the weight of those videos and whispers and the look in Samuel's eyes, she realized what that ease had cost others. Out on the floor, Danielle lifted her glass of wine and took a slow sip. The taste was rich and full-bodied. But more than that, it was hers, chosen without apology, enjoyed without permission. And as the restaurant gradually resumed its rhythm, something new hovered above the chandeliers, not just music or murmurs, but awareness, the kind that can't be undone once it's seen. By the time dessert menus were presented, the energy inside Le Palais Étoilé had shifted entirely. The once cool and curated ambiance now felt tentative like a theater audience sitting through the final act after a plot twist they didn't see coming. Conversations resumed, but with a new undertone. Laughter returned in spots, though quieter, almost reflective. Patrons glanced periodically at Danielle, not out of ridicule this time, but out of something else. Curiosity, guilt, maybe even admiration. Danielle, for her part, remained poised. She hadn't come here tonight to make a statement. She hadn't dressed to be noticed or entered to challenge anyone's perceptions. She simply wanted a quiet meal. But now her presence had become a mirror, and the room was finally beginning to look at itself. After the plates were cleared and the last of the wine poured, Samuel Linwood returned to Danielle's table once more. "I hope the food and service have improved," he said with a soft smile, less formal this time. Danielle nodded. "It's been a very different experience." Samuel hesitated, then added, "Would you be open to speaking with the staff before you go?" "They're all in the back, waiting." Danielle blinked. It wasn't a request she expected, but it wasn't unwelcome either. "I'll do it," she said, "if they're willing to listen." Moments later, Samuel guided her through the staff hallway and into a large meeting room near the kitchen. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Servers, hosts, bartenders, even chefs, still in aprons, stood shoulder to shoulder. Their faces ranged from nervous to somber. And at the far end of the room, sitting on a low bench with her hands in her lap, was Claire. Her posture had changed. Gone was the stiff confidence and lifted chin. Her eyes were red, shoulders small, hands trembling. Danielle stood at the center of the room and took a breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't deliver a speech rehearsed for effect. She just spoke. "When I walked into this restaurant tonight, I was excited to be here. I've read about this place, heard about the chef. I wanted to treat myself. That's all." She glanced around the room, making eye contact with several employees. But something happened between that door and this room. A shift, one that started with a glance, then a question, then a tone, each one small enough to ignore if you really wanted to. But when they add up, they speak loudly. Danielle paused. Her voice was even, but her words carried weight. "You see, for someone like me, this isn't rare. It's not shocking. It's familiar. Too familiar. And it's exhausting, constantly having to walk into spaces wondering, will they see me for who I am, or what they've already decided I must be?" A young waiter near the back swallowed hard and lowered his eyes. Danielle continued, "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront anyone. But I did stay. I sat through it. I watched. I waited. Because I wanted you to see it. Because if I had walked out, nothing would have changed. If I had snapped back, I would have been blamed. But now we're here. She turned toward Claire. And I want to say this to you directly, Claire. You hurt me. Your words, your attitude, the way you minimize me, it hurt. But more than that, it revealed something important. That somewhere along the way, you learned that power means being able to decide who belongs and who doesn't. That's not power. That's fear. That's bias dressed as professionalism. Claire's throat bobbed. Her eyes glistened. Danielle didn't step closer, didn't try to shame her. She just said, you can change. All of you can, but only if you choose to. The room was utterly silent. Then Claire rose slowly as if her limbs were made of lead and stepped forward. I was wrong, she said. Her voice cracked. I was so wrong, and I don't even know where to begin to say how sorry I am. Danielle studied her face. There was no performance in her voice. No defensiveness. Just the exposed vulnerability of someone facing a hard truth. I believe you, Danielle replied softly. What matters now is what you do next. Claire broke down into tears covering her face, and two coworkers stepped forward to gently guide her to a chair. Not to shield her, but to hold space for her humanity too. Samuel turned to Danielle, his face tight with emotion. Would you be willing to help us implement training, change how we welcome guests, how we understand bias, not just as a concept, but as something real? Danielle nodded. Yes, because I don't want to see someone else sit where I did tonight. The staff stood motionless for a few beats, and then almost instinctively they began to applaud, not out of ceremony, but out of gratitude. For the truth, for the chance to be better. For a woman who walked in alone and helped them all see what they'd ignored. When Danielle stepped back into the night air, the sky had gone dark. The street was quiet, the city lights twinkling like watchful eyes above. She didn't rush, she didn't look back. She walked with the same composure she'd carried all evening. But something had changed behind her. Inside Le Palais Étoilé, a ripple had begun. Not a trend, not a viral moment, a real shift, something honest. And Danielle Rivers, without shouting, without breaking, had started it. The following week, Le Palais Étoilé made headlines not for its cuisine, but for its reckoning. Clips from the live stream had already made their rounds across major platforms. Viewers from around the country, some from as far away as Baltimore, Denver's even. Anchorage watched the video in disbelief. The comment section was a wildfire of anger, praise, reflection. This is the quiet racism nobody talks about. Respect to this woman for not backing down. Claire should never work in hospitality again. Danielle Rivers handled this with more grace than I ever could. What a queen. But the most recurring sentiment, typed in dozens of variations, was the one that mattered most. This opened my eyes. Within days, Le Palais issued a public apology. Not a generic statement, but a real detailed letter signed by Samuel Linwood himself. It admitted fault. It outlined a plan for staff-wide anti-bias training. And at the heart of that letter was a name Danielle Rivers credited for her poised honesty and strength. The restaurant reached out to Danielle again, inviting her to return, not for show, not for publicity, but as a consultant. She would help shape a better guest experience for everyone, regardless of appearance, background, or neighborhood. At first, Danielle hesitated. She wasn't looking for a new job, and she certainly wasn't looking to become anyone's poster child. But after a quiet walk through Grand Park one evening, watching families laugh under the city's pink-lit fountains, she said yes, because she realized something. This wasn't just about a restaurant. This was about what happens every day in places all across the country, restaurants, banks, schools, airports, where someone makes a snap judgment based on nothing more than skin speech or shoes, where dignity is quietly denied, where politeness is used like a blade. And she had a chance to help fix that, even if only a little. So she stepped into her new role. She sat with the staff again, this time not as a guest, but as a guide. She walked them through the difference between service and respect. She challenged them to notice the assumptions they made before they even said hello. She helped them unlearn the old ugly habits that had been passed down as tradition. And to their credit, they listened. Claire especially. She returned to work after a week-long suspension, unsure if anyone would speak to her. But Danielle did. They had coffee in a quiet corner of the city, and Claire cried again, not just from guilt, but from recognition. She admitted how her biases had gone unchecked for years, how she thought she was being professional when she was really just policing who deserved comfort. Danielle didn't offer forgiveness like a prize. She offered it like a challenge. Now you have to make sure the next person doesn't feel what I felt. And Claire accepted that. Meanwhile, the public conversation grew louder. Other restaurants reached out. A local news station ran a segment called Dining While Black, The Hidden Bias of Hospitality. And Danielle Rivers became a quiet presence behind it all, never chasing attention, but always standing firm. Even the guests who had watched the incident unfold began to change. One woman sent Danielle a letter. "I didn't speak up that night. I should have. I'll regret that silence forever. But I want you to know I won't be silent next time." That was enough. Weeks later, Danielle returned to Le Palais, this time with her sister and two close friends. They were seated by the window where the chandeliers shimmered above them and laughter danced in the air. Their server was kind, respectful, and sincere. Claire didn't serve that table, but she passed by once, paused, and nodded. Not as a formality, but as a woman still learning how to do better. Danielle raised her glass to her friends. "To growth," she said. And as the night moved on and the soft murmur of plates and wine glasses returned, something lingered in the air. A lesson. Not the kind printed in textbooks or wrapped in hashtags, but one delivered simply and powerfully by a woman who chose not to shout, but to stand. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it comes from sitting still when the world wants you to disappear. Danielle Rivers didn't have to raise her voice to reveal the truth. She didn't have to throw a tantrum, call names, or slam doors. She simply held her ground. And by doing so, she forced an entire room, an entire industry, and eventually thousands of people around the country to look in the mirror. Because the truth is, injustice rarely announces itself loudly. It tiptoes in through tones of voice, through seat placements, through long pauses and policies that are only enforced on certain people. It lives in what's not said and who's not welcomed, and in the excuses made when someone calls it out. But what Danielle showed us, and what I hope you carry with you, is that quiet dignity can be louder than any insult, that calm courage can shake even the most rigid systems, and that one person, just one, can be the reason an entire institution changes. So the next time you see someone being treated as less than, don't stay quiet. Speak, act. Even a few words can be the beginning of something better. And if you're ever the one being mistreated, remember Danielle, and remember that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to leave the table. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on truth, courage, and everyday justice. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone face unfair treatment in public? Did you speak up or stay silent? And what will you do next time?